we have a special guest, longtime dungeon master of myself, but also somebody who does it professionally within a local capacity here in the Twin Cities area. I would like to introduce to you the one, the only DMDodge.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the kind introduction. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. It's well deserved as well. If you would like to, and I know you would like to, please tell us a little bit about your background with world building, Dungeons and Dragons, tabletop role playing, dungeon mastering, and the whole shebang.
Absolutely. Yeah, so started a long time ago. My dad and his friends played this wonderful game, Dungeons and Dragons. When I lived in St. Paul, they played in the garage, and that was kind of like a semi-forbidden place for us children. But I would sneak out and listen to them weave their epic tales and make all their monstrous roars and hear their just incredible adventures, and that was the beginning of that sort of inspiration. Now, I don't think that I got to play until I was about 11 or 12, give or take. Mm-hmm. And that's when my dad sat me down and pulled out some AD&D books, his old vintage 80s books, his well-worn green set of dice, all packaged in this really old school leather briefcase with little brass locks on it.
Nice.
Yeah, it was very. It was like an artifact to me. Just seeing that when we sat down at the table, he pulls it out, and I'm like, "Oh my god, I'm finally playing."
It's like a ceremonial, like you have finished your apprenticeship, and you are now ready.
Exactly. So he busts that out, and we play a short campaign in the far eastern world with a book expansion called Oriental Adventures, where I played a Bushido warrior rogue and explored stealing from shops and immediately reaping my just reward for threatening old men.
Gotcha.
But that being said, that's kind of the beginning. After that, I DM'd. We moved out to Wisconsin. I found people here and there to play with, and I DM'd just friends for many years.
Mm-hmm.
Got into college, met you and the rest of the gang, and that's where I built my first world.
With the magic number 300 everywhere.
That's right.
And the first major D&D adventure that I remember playing as a character, playing my original character, Taylor Murdoch, of which up there on the wall, I don't know if you can see it in video, but up there on the wall, I have my original character sheet framed. It is up there, and it is still just preserved behind glass.
I love it.
Tell us a little bit about like some of your newer ventures in D&D, and specifically your transition into professional DMing.
Oh yeah. So after college, it got a little harder to get a group together. I managed it for a while, on and off spurts of adventures here and there. But it kind of got difficult to have a long-running campaign going with everybody's adult lives.
Right.
So I broke into Adventures League, that good standardized Wizards of the Coast Dungeons and Dragons experience.
Yep.
I was started. Yes, you were. Started that at the friendly local gaming store. And it was through that and doing some Adventure League there that I ended up being invited to a charity event being put on by the owner of the company that I now work for.
Gotcha.
And we had a ton of fun at the table. We had fun ahead of time. And so he was like, hey, Devin, do you want to come and make some money running Dungeons and Dragons games? I was like, am I dreaming?
Cha-ching. Like,
are you kidding?
Or stars and eyes, rather. Like, I can do that? That's a thing? Yeah.
Blew my mind.
So what does that entail? Like, because there's multiple ways to do professional DMing. Some people do it through Patreon. Some people, just kind of, they do it at shops and they charge for the privilege or whatever each session. In your case, it's a very special setup. So feel free to kind of share, because it's pretty flippin' awesome, and I think the world needs to hear about it.
Absolutely. So the company is called Heroes B&B, and easy enough to find. If you just Google Heroes B&B, it'll be on top. We do weekend-long, full-day immersive experiences. We write our own stories. We do much of our gaming on it's not exactly a virtual tabletop. We do it on digital maps.
Right.
So it's a very, very visual experience. We have 2 storytellers, so we end up getting to do a ton of role play with everyone who plays. But yeah, it is, like you said, it's a bit different of a thing. We do bachelor parties, we do birthdays, we do weekend long sessions, we do charity epics. Epics are a very specific way to game, where you have a bunch of different tables with their own respective game masters participating in the same awesome story, and the tables get to affect each other, and people get to like travel between the tables. And,
yeah.
Really a really cool way to play.
Excellent. And it's kind of it's a smaller, kind of more miniaturized. No, I wouldn't say miniaturized, but it's a much more localized. That's the better term. Localized version of a living universe. If you have multiple tables where, different things going on and they're interacting with each other. Yeah. And that's a very unique setup, because it's less just kind of playing sessions like on a weekly basis with a group of people, but more setting up special events with all sorts of fanfare and production value tied to it, and custom writing of the adventures and stuff.
Exactly. And like custom painted miniatures, custom printed miniatures. We get voice actors to do these beautiful voiceovers for slides to kind of get you present. Get you there. And we have a painter that does all our minis, who's just incredible. So we have some really unique bosses and unique plants in there that I think are pretty special.
Yeah, absolutely. So now that we have a gist of your background in Dungeons and Dragons, running it professionally, and just world building in general, the topic of tonight's stream is guilds and gangs. Diving into what makes a guild, what makes a gang, how do they function in structure, what is their purpose in the world, things of that nature. And I will have a small bit of presentation after this interview. However, as somebody that has run multiple campaigns in multiple sessions, in multiple worlds, incorporating some of these elements. In your definition, what would you say is the difference between a guild? What makes a guild? What makes a gang? And what's the difference between them?
Yeah. So for me, my understanding is really that guilds are a formal organization to develop individuals professionally, and to monopolize businesses within a local region.
Right.
So if you head back to like the medieval times, historically in the real world, of course there were 2 major types of guilds.
Right.
You had your crafters and your merchants guilds.
Right.
And they had, there was some crossover in what they did with the merchants shops and all this sort of stuff, but those were the very basic ones. And they were kind of like, they came about as cities grew, as there became more need for specialized labor and diversification of labor.
Right.
So with that like kind of historical context, thinking about world building, the guilds in fantasy worlds should tie incredibly heavily into the types of cities you build. In terms of what goods and services you can get where, in terms of transport of goods and services, in terms of local governments, politicians, guilds would manipulate all of those.
Right. In many ways, guilds are responsible for the initial urbanization of a lot of these cities and the actual establishment of not exclusive, inclusive economies. Robust maybe I just throw out a different adjective altogether. In terms of a professional organization, it seems like there's a lot of Venn diagram overlap between that of which defines a guild and a gang, at least in structure. But how would you define a gang in your definition?
Yeah, so like you said, there's a lot of overlap. Guilds were notorious for kind of broaching that illicit territory where gangs make their homes. But gangs, I think, are more driven by the opposite of guilds, a lack of resources. A place wherein people need to resort to crime, because that's a huge definition, I think, for gangs. Is a gang has to be engaging in illicit activity.
Right.
So you have to have a need for that. There has to be some situation that arises that pushes people to violence, to hatred, to these rivalries that people will lay down their lives for other members.
Right.
And that right there is another defining difference. Loyalty, right? Like a member of a guild pays their dues and crafts and is part of that whole system, but a gang member is bought in blood. Right.
It's almost familial in some contexts.
In more than some. If we look back through history, this is another fun fact. Over a third of historical gangs started in families, so they have the familial context, right? And little fun fact about that, I was doing a little bit of reading and research, but one of the ways that they started, oftentimes, especially in medieval periods, had to do with inheritance. Mm-hmm. And basically single person inheritance. So all of the money, all the good, all the wealth, all the land was going to go to the firstborn son.
Right.
That left all these rich family members in this situation where they were not going to be rich anymore if they didn't do something.
Yep.
Yeah.
Gotcha. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. Then you have all of like the siblings ganging up. There you go. Ganging up on the one in order to, get their riches, or having all sorts of different, rivalries between family members, and that, even within a family, you can have rivaling against each other.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I know that there is a Dungeons and Dragons opportunity that you have to get to in the near future. Another one of our friends, as a matter of fact, you were headed in their direction to play in their D&D game. But before you go, I just want to ask you one or two questions. Actually, just really ask you about if you have any particular memories or any particular stories or anecdotes about gang or guild involvement in any of the games that you've run or any of the games that you've played that you think is noteworthy to share.
Absolutely. One of my favorite books. Actually, we had our brief run in Descent into Avernus, and that makes me think a lot about Baldur's Gate, which in Faerun is a huge trade city, right?
Right.
It's kind of one of the larger ones, but it makes me think about gangs there, because there you have a city which is a perfect example of the divide between the ultra wealthy and the super impoverished in one clustered area.
Right.
And you have the situation is rife for gangs. You have the ultra wealthy, lots of an abusive police force, the Flaming Fist,
Mm-hmm.
and an abandonment of the poor. So gangs there are an interesting one because we think gangs, bad guys, right?
Right.
But they don't always have to be bad guys. And I say this because in world building you can have all varieties of guilds and gangs, but the ones in Baldur's Gate developed specifically within neighborhoods of all of these kind of like tradesfolks, laborers, people who lived there who were sick of getting murdered in the streets, who were getting mugged, and they ended up creating their own neighborhood gangs. And that, of course, created territory and tons of distrust in the city in general. So then you had these neighborhood gang wars that would break out. And ultimately in Baldur's Gate, the party gets involved between a couple of these gang wars. But I think that's a perfect example of how gangs can develop for good, right? Or for protection of the people.
Yeah. And that's definitely an element because, there can be other economic or oppressive factors that forces a group of people or forces a community to kind of lash out or, work to protect itself from outside forces. And through that protectionism begins sort of building this identity that is sort of us against the world, us against the kingdom, us against the next neighborhood. And that in itself is a gang. And in general, of course, that is a lot of the anecdote that you has shared. I have experienced directly as a player in that game of Descent into Avernus, and I don't think I felt more frustrated at the shenanigans of various illicit individuals as I did than on the streets of Baldur's Gate. Especially the Flaming Fists. I secretly sort of wanted to just take all my anger out on the Flaming Fist in particular.
Well, you should. That's a criminal police force for sure. It doesn't get worse than them in terms of like organized cities, right?
Yeah, for sure. So with that in mind, it is about locally it's about 7:31. So I think this is probably the best time for us to wrap up the conversation. But all in all, I just want to say thank you very much for coming on to the stream, for talking with me about gangs and guilds. Is there anything that you want to plug, anything that you want to advertise or make a shout out for or anything like that? It's completely up to you.
Yeah, I just want to shout out Heroes B&B, my company. We just had a fundraiser this last weekend, a charity epic event. And the organization that we do charity for in particular is the Wounded Warriors Project. We think a really good charity organization, but the fine players in that epic managed to help us raise $1,887 for that
Nice.
Charity. So,
Nice.
So feel good about that.
From one weekend, right? Or
yes,
one game.
One day.
One game. Yeah. Once again, Devin, I want to thank you for coming onto the stream. And Devin is going to head off to his next D&D game.
Sounds good. Thanks, Matt. We'll see you later.